Absolutely. So Chelmsford didn't quite cause a cup upset against Ipswich. As I say, we don't know the full details, but it never really was on. However, your next match, which we're going to look at, there was a bit of a cup upset, and I'm really looking forward to delving into this just for petty rivalry. I said we weren't going to do it, but we are going to do it. Yeah, tell us about 20. Sorry, Saturday the 4th of January, 1975, at the Goldstone Ground. Now, Kieron, tell me what happened then.
Well, the short version is we lost.
Yes.
The longer version, as I sort of just hinted at, my dad, yeah, I don't know what my dad did for work. What he actually did. All I know is he worked for American Express, and I think he was some sort of phone engineer. But in those days, you never asked. Your dad works. His dad's off to work. That's fine.
No,
And American Express moved their European headquarters to Brighton. So
of course it did. Yeah.
he used to commute from Chelmsford to London, and
Hmm.
commuting from Chelmsford to Brighton was never on. So we moved to Brighton, and I knew that the move was going to take place. So I started to take a bit of interest in Brighton, through listening to the radio and so on. And I remember when Clough arrived, and I
Hmm.
remember the eight. I remember seeing. I think again it was on. It was either on Match of the Day or on ITV. They played Bristol Rovers at home, and they lost 8-2 at home to
Mm.
them. Then they lost 6-1 at home. I think it's to Rochdale, and then they lost 4-0 at home to Walton and Hersham. So
Yeah.
the Clough magic, as such, wasn't manifesting itself in terms of
No.
results. So I don't think he lasted very long, and then I'd I'd moved to the to the town as it was in those days, and it was too far away for me to cycle. It was probably 6 or 7 miles. So,
Right.
and Brighton's quite hilly, so
Yes.
it really was not a good idea. Um, so I wanted to go to the football. And mum and dad, they weren't interested, but one of the neighbours was a fan, and he used to drink with my old man, and he said, I'll take him." So
Hmm.
uh, we booked in to go and see. I thought, well, Brighton, I want to see him win. We've got Leatherhead
Yeah.
in the FA Cup, um, and Leatherhead. I think they'd done okay. I think
Mm.
they'd had a cup. They'd beaten a couple of, or at least one football league club, so therefore they were giant
Yeah.
killers, and they were coming to the Goldstone. And before the match, in the newspapers, there was a bloke who was nicknamed Chris the Lip Kelly, and
Remember him well. Remember
yeah,
him well.
he looked like he would be in an early 70s prog band. Yeah, he's got the long hair.
Yeah.
He looks a bit of a wide boy. He
Yeah.
was their centre forward, and as soon as we heard his name being announced, we were booing him because we'd heard it.
Yeah.
He was gonna knock us out. So and so on, and he then proceeded to knock us out, and
Mm.
that was. And I think they went on to play Leicester City,
They did. They
and
did.
they went 2-0 up and lost 3-2 in the FA
Correct.
Cup
Yeah.
that season. Um, but yeah, that was my first experience of Brighton as such. And I think it set me up fairly well for most of the next 50 years,
Yeah.
because in my view, it's not the joy and success that binds us as football fans, but it's the misery,
Mm.
and it's the consoling each other during a game and after a game, and sitting in the car driving home saying, "Whenever I've had enough. I can't, I've learnt my lesson." And I can recall doing that on a Tuesday night, losing 7-1 to Huddersfield, and saying, I just need to go and find myself something better to do. And then, of course, 24 hours later, you've forgotten about it, and you're planning a trip to Southend or wherever it was going to be on the next Saturday.
Of course. And as you say, Brian Clough had come in, hadn't been a great success, and he had departed. But Peter Taylor, his sidekick, had stayed. And you look at, you talk about Chris the Lip Kelly, who was very quotable. Well, Peter Taylor, before this game, said, "We have an excellent chance to do well this season after we swatted away those minnows." Now, I'm going to say the word Schadenfreude sort of brings very heavy vibes there, because you don't do that. And guess what happens? But Chris, the Leatherhead Lip, apparently he was called the Lip after Louis, the Louisville Lip, who was Muhammad Ali. I don't know if this is true. It could be apocryphal. So he said he was a mix of Stan Bowles and Rodney Marsh. But he said, "Watch us go. I'm about to put Leatherhead on the map." And that's exactly what he did. So then Taylor, I've read a really good guy, Tim Carter, you will know, the Brighton historian.
Yeah.
He's brilliant. He's provided me with quite a few bits and pieces from the Evening Argus, because we've had quite a few fans who Brighton was their first game. Mark Pougatch, Brighton Arsenal was his first game. Nigel Tassel, the author who you probably know, his first game was actually Brighton beating Palace 3-2. Didn't happen. But it's just fantastic reading some of the stuff that Taylor came out with. And he then, after the game, said, "We were outfought, outplayed. I'm disgusted with the Brighton side and full of admiration for the opposition." So, that is a story. As you said, Brighton had lost 4-0 at home to Walton and Hersham, who were an amateur team the season before, and then had their calamities against Bristol Rovers or whatever. And then to come into it again, for Peter Taylor to go, "Oh, well, we swap these minnows and see how we get on." Guess what happens? The minnows fight back. And as you say, they were 2-0 up against Leicester. Chris the Lip Kelly was doing it again, but he never quite made it. So it's quite nice to have that. I suppose it's a dose of reality, isn't it? In your early support of a club, is you get beaten by an amateur side with some gobby bastard up front. So it sets you up, as you say, it sets you up. A couple of other things I just wanted to touch on. So clearly now, as a Brighton fan, you've been through, as you say, you've been through the mill. You've lost your Goldstone ground. You had to go and play at the Withdean. You had to go and play at Gillingham.
Gillingham,
let's face it, no one wants to do that. And then you were on the verge of going out of the league. And funnily enough, it was against your old mates Hereford, where you rescued it and got a 1-1 draw. And clearly, what has happened since has been remarkable. Even as a Palace fan, I've got to say, it's pretty remarkable. And you're an annoyingly well-run club now. So, we moved from Great Whittle Street and the Goldstone ground, and then suddenly Brighton are in Europe. I assume you went to the first game in Europe. I know it was a loss again, but you went to the AEK Athens game.
Yes.
How did that feel? I mean, it must have been. I mean, I would love to watch Palace in Europe, but we've got more chance of getting a Eurovision Song Contest thing going. But how did you feel about that game as a first? Watching your club in Europe.
It was actually incredibly emotional, because I've had I've been here in Brighton for 50 years. I've got friends who, like you are, who have been to match with. Those friends are no longer here, and you were sort of thinking, "Oh God, John, this would have been meant so much to him, or to Sarah, or whoever these people are." So there was that touch of that, and especially some of us met before the match, and that's the type of thing we were reflecting on. To do it, to actually have experienced it, I always say that if you talk to any football fan about their life and you say, give me the top 10 moments of your life, they love their wife, their partner, they love their
Mhm.
kids, and so on. Your football club's going to probably have half a dozen of those top 10 moments, and
Yeah.
that's not big. And perhaps some of those moments might have been number one and two occasionally when you're listing them, but you never admit it to the person that you love.
No.
So it was sort of the culmination of all of those things, and uh, we were we were outwitted. We had a huge reality check. We lost the match 3-2.
Mm.
I think they had three shots all match, but they knew what they were doing. And I think to a certain extent we felt, okay, this is it. We've got to Europe. We're gonna finish bottom of the group, and things turned out a wee bit better than that.
Mm.
Yeah, it was fantastic. The fact that I've never been to Athens in my life before. I've never been to Rome in my life before. So
Mhm.
to visit those cities was great. There was that sense of pride without it being too smug. Because my big fear about being a Brighton fan is people are getting a bit fed up of the fact that we are one of the best run clubs in football.
Mhm.
Um, and you you don't want to come across as, because let's face it, Brighton's got a reputation for quinoa and lattes and so on, so it doesn't help itself.
Yeah.
Even though, in my view, as somebody that, I work with local food banks, I'm aware of the deprivation and poverty, and the inequity of social distribution where I live. Um, but you talk to people about Brighton, and there's also those people there as well who,
Mhm.
ironically, don't tend to support Brighton of Albion because football's not really for them.
No.
Um, but yeah, it was a fantastic experience. I'd love to do it again.
Mhm.
Um, Europa Conference, bring it on. There's no sneering from me. I think we were very, very fortunate to have, Marseille, IC Athens, Ajax, and Roma. Those are
Yeah.
big cities, and they're pretty,
Absolutely.
they're pretty high profile teams. If I have to go to Albania to see the second best team in their league in the conference, I can't wait. But we've got a lot of work to do before that.
Mm.
So yes, it was fantastic. Did that match mean to me as much as Hereford in 1997? No,
Mhm.
because that was survival. As a Palace fan that you've been that close to the trapdoor,
Yeah.
and that was due to issues with owners rather than
Mhm.
what was happening on the pitch. I think we had both the owners and the problems on the pitch. Um, but it was a celebration. It was a remembrance of friends gone past, and so on. And we lost, but that was the result to a certain extent wasn't irrelevance. It wasn't an irrelevance to Robert De Zerbi because he's the
No.
coach and it wasn't an irrelevance to the players. But for me, it was we've got to Europe. I ran a marathon. Once you run a marathon, you can never unrun a marathon. It's a miserable experience.
Yeah.
So miserable I vowed when I finished I'd never do it again, and then enrolled for another one, which was an equally stupid thing to do. Um, but I'll cherish the fact that we've achieved this, and if Brighton will be back in the Championship in due course. We all know where we are in the pecking order.
Mm.
I'm sure as a Palace fan, you're absolutely delighted that 11, 12 seasons, and
Yeah.
we also know that you're not going to go down this season. You might have a couple of
Well,
super.
I'm glad you're confident about that. I'm
Yeah,
not so.
yeah. I've you're I hate to say it, you're too good to go down
Mm.
because you've got one or two players who can win a match on their own, even if the team collectively is not delivering. So we've had that Premier League experience. We've had the League Two experience and all bits in between. Europe was it's a bit like being taken out for a date by Kylie, as far as I'm concerned. It's never going to happen again. It was probably a
No.
mistake on their behalf in the first place. But hey, you can tell your mates about it for the rest of your life.
Yeah, I like the analogy. Yeah, and my wife's actually going to see Kylie later this year, so she'll
Oh wow,
mention it to
cool.
her at the time. Two last things. Do you remember? I know you talked about watching Match of the Day religiously, not so much the big match because your parents were in the house and probably they said, no, you've got to have your Sunday lunch, you're not watching
Yeah.
football. Um, do you remember your first FA Cup final and also your first World Cup final? Because, as I say, you're not at a similar age to me, so I'm assuming your first World Cup final would be the 1970 World
Yes, it
Cup
was.
finals
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
Mexico,
Yeah.
which in fact was only a few months after your first visit to a football match at Arsenal West Ham. Did that also impress on you? This you talked about the contract. You talked about once you're there, you can't separate it. It's
Yeah.
just it's not possible. It's within you and it's there for life. Did you get that sense of excitement from watching an FA Cup final, whichever the first one might have been on telly, black and white possibly, and also with the World Cup
Yeah,
finals?
I very much remember because the World Cup was taking place in Mexico,
Mm-hmm.
there were issues in terms of the times difference. So I think in the group games, England beat Czechoslovakia 1-0. I think that was a Jeff
Yeah,
Hurst goal. I wasn't allowed to watch it because it was on too late. So my
right.
mum and dad didn't want to watch it anyway.
Yeah,
England beat somebody else. Again,
Romania was it
Romania.
possibly?
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
I was allowed. I think the Brazil match was on slightly earlier, and it was on a Sunday or a Saturday. So I was
Right.
allowed to watch that, and I can still remember the Gordon Banks save, and I can still remember the Pele goal. No, it
Yeah.
wasn't a Pele goal. It was
Jarzinho.
Rubinho, Jorginho. Yeah, 'cause it was Pele who was who
The
nearly scored.
save.
Yeah.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
So I remember that, and then it was West Germany, uh, and Martin Peters scored, Alan Mullery scored, and I thought, we're going through to the semi-finals. Peter Bonetti was in goal. There's all these
Yeah.
stories again doing the rounds because it come from the newspapers. And somebody at school had said, "Oh, if it's said at school, his dad knows somebody
Yeah.
that Gordon Banks had been poisoned
Poisoned.
by
Yeah,
the
yeah.
Germans before the match, and they had to go and play Peter Bonetti."
Yeah.
And again, I can still remember Franz Beckenbauer got the first, Uwe Seeler with that back header, which wasn't dissimilar to the one that Chris Wood scored
Yeah,
against.
all
Yeah,
right, Kieran. Let's
again,
move on. Let's move on. Yeah.
I thought I'd
I
just
don't think
an
Chris Wood
anecdote.
doesn't look like anything like Uwe Seeler.
No,
Uwe Seeler
no,
was a
no.
little guy with not much hair.
Yeah,
Chris
not
Wood's
much
a
hair.
big
Yeah, but
New Zealand bloke. But
it was
anyway,
that sort of back header over the goalkeeper.
yes,
Yeah,
yes.
and then of course Gerd Muller scored, and I was devastated, absolutely devastated. So that was certainly my first World Cup, and my
Mm.
first FA Cup. I think it was also that year. It was Chelsea versus Leeds.
Oh,
Um,
yeah.
so it was the 3 p.m. on Saturday, which was it. I thought it was a great game of football because I don't notice the fouls because I'm 8 years old. But by all
Yeah.
accounts, it was 22 blokes kicking lumps out of each other. And
Mhm.
then the replay was at Old Trafford. Was that
It
right?
was. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
And that was what 2-1 to Chelsea. And
yeah.
I wanted Leeds to win. I don't know why. I think a lot
Mhm.
of people liked Leeds in those
Yeah,
days because there was a touch of glamour about them. Because even or rather, we thought it was glamour. We
yeah,
didn't realise that Don Revie was quite a dirty
yes,
manager. but
Yeah.
that. So yeah, so that was certainly my first FA Cup, and I was it the following season. It was Charlie George scored the winner against
Yeah,
Liverpool,
because Arsenal
71.
won the
Well, the,
double the season after
that's
you'd
right.
seen them
Yeah,
beat West Ham. So they were, yeah, it was Charlie George famously falling
famously, yeah,
back onto the
yeah,
Wembley turf. But yeah,
that's
the
right.
Chelsea Leeds. If you ever get to see a video, I think they would now call it a video nasty. It is absolutely
Brutal.
brutal. Oh, you're just wincing, even though you're watching a video from 50 odd years ago. Oh, really? Ow, oof. And I think the replay was of similar ilk, and it was very soon afterwards. It was when you had a replay
It was
4 days
Thursday, wasn't
afterwards.
it?
So
Yes, yeah.
obviously the resentment and the bitterness was still absolutely at a peak.
Yes.
Billy Bremner and all those guys. Wow. So yes, that's I think it's a very interesting FA Cup final to remember as your first. Okay, so last question I'm going to throw
Okay.
at you, Kieron, because I know you have other things to do. Is have you ever taken anyone to their first game? So you were taken by your uncle to as a West Ham fan. He wanted to get you into football. Maybe you didn't quite fall under the West Ham bubble, but have you taken a son, a daughter, your wife to their first game, and how did that feel?
Yeah, I took my two kids to the first match we went was Rochdale versus Brighton. Um, it it yeah, my son's autistic, so it wasn't for him. There's too much noise, too much.
Yeah.
So that was an experience. Okay, I learned from the experience. Um, so that was okay. I think I went to two more matches with them. Bury and Chester. It's amazing how these things do stick in your mind.
Yeah.
Um, with regards to my wife, my very first date with her, so we'd sort of met, and I'd mentioned in passing, do you like football? And she was a sort of a bit indifferent. She said, yeah, I do like football. She kept it very cool. So I said, do you fancy coming to a football match with me? Um, and she said, okay. Yeah, it sort of wasn't quite her idea of a first date. Um,
No.
so I said, oh, great. So I took her to Hartlepool. So
Actually,
we
away to
away,
Hartlepool.
Hartlepool away. So yeah, at the time I was living in Manchester.
Right.
So I took her to Hartlepool for a first date.
Hmm.
Um, we lost, I think we lost 2-1. I seem to remember Glenn Murray getting sent off
Oh,
because
yeah.
Glenn Murray in his first stint at Brighton had a habit of he was quite moody.
Oh, yeah. Well, he's a Cumbrian, isn't he? They're quite moody.
Yeah. Um, so we lost, and this is a ridiculous thing to say is I, I'm slightly more mature now. I was very emotionally immature as a football fan on match day. I'm terrible, and I
Mhm.
didn't say a single word all the
Oh,
way back because I was sulking.
oh
Um,
dear.
so, and I wasn't thinking I need to work on a second date. It was, oh, we lost. Oh God, I'm really angry.
Yeah.
So I didn't say a single word in the back. And very luckily for me, yeah, when I dropped her off, I said, "You do anything next Thursday or something?" And she said, "Okay, but can we not go to a football match?"
Right.
So we went out for a meal, and so I said, "So have you ever been to?" Yeah, have you been to a football match before? She says, yeah. She goes, yeah, I've been to a few matches before. So what was the last match you went to? She says, well, my former husband's at Manchester United. So the most recent match I've been to is the Champions League final when I was in hospitality. And I'm going, okay, so you've been there. and I've taken you to Hartlepool. And she said, yeah, so what was it like? She said, oh, yeah, yeah, well, after the match, Sir Alex, was chatting away to him and the players and so on because
Yeah.
my husband, ex-husband, worked for them. So I was very, very fortunate that I didn't mess up because my wife is a very tolerant woman because I work
Clearly.
seven days a week with regards to my job, and she has to
Yeah.
put up with an awful lot. But Glenn Murray nearly ruined what's been the best thing in my life.
Well, it's you rescued that particular one, and I have all admiration for your wife for moving from Manchester United, Hospitality Champions League to Hartlepool, and still sticking with you. I'll let you into a secret. First game my wife went to was the 1990 FA Cup final replay between Manchester United and Crystal Palace,
Oh wow!
which she quite enjoyed. Lots of red and blue balloons. It was all going very well. We did lose, but it was fine. It was Wembley. Next game I took her to was Coventry at home on a Tuesday night. 12,000 people. We lost 2-0. And similarly, I did not speak after the game, tracking back from Southern's Park all the way to Northwest London, not a word. So this is the reality of, introducing someone who's very dear to you to football. It can go really badly wrong, but through thick and thin, we stayed with it and you stayed with it. So I think that's a testimony to, both our lady wives for getting through that initiation ceremony and making sure that it never happened again, probably. But there we go. Kieron, it's been a fabulous journey. I've really enjoyed every single aspect of it because there were different aspects of it, from Highbury, as I say, to New Rickle Street to the Goldstone Ground, and ending up in Hartlepool with the future Mrs. Maguire, I think is just fantastic. Is there one thing that still strikes you as what got you the bug? That first game or the television or something that you just thought, looking back on it, that was clearly the hook?
It was that sense of belonging the first time I went. The fact that I was singing songs with grown men. I wasn't a West Ham fan, but when
Yeah.
when they broke it, we're forever blowing bubbles. I've got to go and join in. So I think that it was that sense of community, the sense that I'm not being too melodramatic. I've been chosen to love football, and I'll be honest, that is one of the greatest things. I genuinely feel sorry for people that don't get football, and at the same time, I'm slightly envious of them because they don't. I saw Brighton draw 0-0 last night at Brentford. Got home, and the first thing I'm thinking about is Arsenal are going to absolutely tater us on Saturday.
Yeah.
And it shouldn't be occupying my thoughts. I'm supposed to be a rational person with logic and common sense, but it departs. And that's the worst thing about football, and it's the best thing about football because it's not real, but it is real.
Yeah, no, I think that's a very good point and a good conclusion to today's podcast. So appreciate your time, Kieron. Funny enough, Kevin said almost exactly the same thing about, getting dragged into it. Not, you look at it logically, it's mad, but you can't do anything about it. So you've got to ride with it.